In January 2026, the city of Minneapolis suddenly became the symbol of something far bigger than just immigration enforcement, because what began as another routine ICE operation quickly escalated into violence, panic, outrage, and a national media explosion, as federal immigration officers were involved in yet another shooting, sending shockwaves across immigrant communities and forcing Americans everywhere to ask a terrifying question. Why is the United States deporting so many people right now? And what role has ICE truly become in this growing crisis? As news channels lit up with urgent breaking reports and footage spread online showing chaos, armed agents, and frightened civilians, the Minneapolis incident became more than a headline, because it revealed a deeper truth: that deportation in America is no longer just paperwork and court orders, but increasingly a system of power, fear, and force unfolding in broad daylight. And Minneapolis became the flashpoint, because according to Reuters, Minnesota officials confirmed federal agents were involved in another shooting tied to immigration enforcement, triggering protests so intense that Governor Tim Walz publicly condemned the operations as horrifying and demanded explanations about why such extreme force was being used. One of the most shocking cases was that of Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother whose death was officially ruled a homicide caused by multiple gunshot wounds after an ICE encounter, a tragedy that immediately raised questions about accountability, escalation, and what ICE operations are becoming in modern America. And the reason these incidents strike such a nerve is because ICE is no longer a small enforcement agency operating quietly in the background. Since Immigration and Customs Enforcement, created in 2003 after the September 11th attacks, has transformed into one of the most powerful domestic security institutions in the country, with tens of thousands of arrests, detention transfers, and removals happening every single year. And what makes the current moment even more intense is that the undocumented immigrant population itself has reached record-breaking levels, because Pew Research reported that unauthorized immigrants in the United States climbed to an all-time high of around 14 million people in 2023, meaning roughly 4.1% of the entire U.S. population. And this growing number has become the political fuel powering deportation surges. Now imagine this as a map on screen, because undocumented immigrants are not evenly distributed, as states like California, Texas, Florida, and New York host the largest communities, while new immigrant growth is rising in places like Minnesota, Georgia, and North Carolina, turning deportation from a border issue into an internal national issue spreading deeper into American cities. And when immigrants live under this system, ICE is not just an agency, it becomes a constant shadow, because raids often happen without warning, before sunrise, at workplaces, homes, and neighborhoods, leaving families shattered before they even understand what is happening. And this fear is not abstract, because detention itself is exploding. As Human Rights Watch documented that throughout 2024, the average number of people held in ICE detention daily was about 37,500. But by mid-2025, the detained population exceeded 56,000 people on any given day, marking one of the highest detention levels in U.S. history. USA Facts further reported that ICE detention numbers surged dramatically after Trump's second term began, rising from around 40,500 detainees to more than 70,800, showing how enforcement intensity can shift rapidly depending on political leadership. And this is exactly why deportation is not just law enforcement, but a political instrument that expands or contracts with presidential power. Now think of the visuals you can place here, because a chart showing ICE detention rising year by year creates immediate tension, while another map showing detention centers clustered across Texas, Arizona, Louisiana, and Florida reveals how deportation is not only removal, but also imprisonment inside a domestic detention network. And behind these numbers are real human lives, Because Maria came to the United States from Honduras nearly a decade ago, escaping gang violence and economic collapse, raising two American-born children, contributing silently to an economy that depends on immigrant labor, until one morning at 5:30 a.m., when loud knocking shattered the illusion of safety, because ICE agents were standing outside her door, and within minutes, her husband was detained, her children were screaming, and her entire future collapsed into a nightmare that began not with a trial, not with a goodbye, but with handcuffs. And stories like hers are not rare. They are the daily reality behind deportation statistics. To understand why deportations are increasing, you must realize deportation is not a single action, but an industrial pipeline, because the system begins with apprehension through workplace raids, jail transfers, or traffic stops. Then immigrants are pushed into immigration court. But immigration court is fundamentally unequal because there is no guaranteed government-provided lawyer, meaning many immigrants face judges alone. And after court comes detention inside ICE facilities, many privately operated, where migrants are transferred across state lines like cargo. And finally, deportation flights begin, where ICE charters aircraft removing people in mass numbers, sending them back to countries they may not have seen in decades. And the removals are not small, because the Migration Policy Institute found that since fiscal year 2021 through early 2024, the Biden administration had already carried out around 1.1 million deportations, putting it on pace to match or even approach Trump-era levels, proving that deportation remains bipartisan infrastructure, not just one-party policy. ICE itself published enforcement statistics showing removals rising sharply in fiscal year 2024, with enforcement activity increasing nearly 70% compared to the previous year, which means deportation is accelerating rather than slowing down. And before we go deeper, if you want more documentary-style breakdowns packed with charts, real data, and the hidden machinery of global power systems like ICE, immigration enforcement, and geopolitical consequences shaping everyday life, then make sure you subscribe right now, because the next investigations will uncover what happens inside detention centers, why deportation has quietly become a billion-dollar industry, and how this crisis is spreading into more American cities beyond Minneapolis. Now the next question is inevitable. Why are so many people living illegally inside the United States in the first place? And the answer is far more complex than politicians admit. Because undocumented immigration is not just about border crossings, since visa overstays account for a significant share of undocumented growth, meaning many people entered legally through tourist, student, or work visas and simply never left, while others are trapped in asylum backlogs waiting years for hearings. And alongside all of this, smuggling networks exploit desperation, turning migration routes into billion-dollar underground industries. And here is another map cue, because migration flows from Central America, Venezuela, Haiti, and increasingly Asia, can be shown as arrows across the hemisphere, demonstrating that migration is not random, but shaped by economic collapse, political instability, and U.S. labor demand. Deportation in America is not new, but the scale changes dramatically depending on administration, because Syracuse University's track data shows that under Barack Obama, ICE logged more than 3.1 million deportations across 8 years, with removals peaking at over 407,000 in fiscal year 2012, while Trump's first term recorded fewer than 932,000 deportations total, peaking around 269,000 in 2019, illustrating that raw deportation numbers do not always match political rhetoric. Under Joe Biden, removals surged again through post-pandemic enforcement, and under Trump's renewed influence, deportation has transformed into something even more aggressive, because Trump turned immigration enforcement into a political spectacle demanding mass raids, expanded ICE authority, and messaging designed to instill fear. And Minneapolis today reflects this escalation, with protests erupting and state leaders condemning federal crackdowns as sickening and out of control. So what is ICE truly doing? And why is the United States deporting so many people now? Because deportation is not only about law, it is about power. It is a tool to demonstrate control, to shape political identity, to reassure some voters while terrorizing others. And under Trump's demand for intensified enforcement, ICE has become more militarized, more chaotic, and more prone to deadly confrontations, with Minneapolis acting as a warning sign that the deportation machine is no longer operating quietly, but violently in public view. And what makes this moment terrifying is that Minneapolis is not the exception, it is the blueprint. Because if armed immigration enforcement is producing shootings, deaths, and protests in one American city, then the question is not whether it can happen elsewhere, but when. As America is deporting more people, not because migration suddenly began, but because enforcement has become the chosen answer to a structural problem, and ICE has become the face of that answer, carrying out raids, detentions, removals, and now deadly confrontations under political pressure, creating fear inside immigrant communities, anger in American streets, chaos in cities like Minneapolis, and a future where deportation is no longer simply immigration policy, but a national crisis unfolding in real time. So the real question is no longer how many people will be deported, because the real question is how far this will go before the country reaches a breaking point. And if you want the next part where we expose what happens inside ICE detention centers, why deportation has become one of the biggest hidden industries in America, and how this crackdown is reshaping the future of US society, subscribe now, because this story is far from over.